Hello, this is Kade and it's now day 5 of the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo of 2950. And today it's MISC Day, or Musashi Industrial and Starflight Concern, as the full name would say, but well, everybody knows them as MISC. That center we have the good old Starfarer, in this case the Gemini, so that's the military version, which lore-wise, what I understand, is finished off by Aegis, so MISC builds the hull and a lot of the stuff on the ship and then it sends over to Aegis to maybe it gets up armored or gets the military components installed. It is slated for a overhaul, especially the interior, because it was the first big ship interior they made. And instead of making it a usable interior, they tried to turn it into a single player FPS level, and it's absolutely appalling. Like, it's a nightmare to be around in this ship. So a lot of people also don't like using it right now because of that very problem. It is of course a massive fuel hauler and refuel tanker, so it can refuel ships in space, and that's going to be a very good business, I suspect, down the line. Especially with a ship of this size, you can of course start to refuel the larger ships, and the more fuel you sell, the more money you can make. Going from a big ship to a very small ship, the MISC Racer series, their entry into the racing market, and also the focus, I believe, of the trailer for today. The Racer is a ship that has some people divide it, some people like it, some people love it, and especially with the design they say like, it looks like an F1 car in space, but then of course a lot of the races also happen within the atmosphere, so having aerodynamic structures could really be of benefit. Personally, I really like the Racer. I'm not planning to be a racer, but I have a Racer, and that's the LX version, so the luxury version, to have as a bit of a runabout on my 890 jump, because I thought it would be a fairly fitting ship for that purpose. Overall, they're fun to fly around. They are a bit short-ranged, so that's a bit of an issue right now in the verse, but they are incredibly fast, incredibly nimble, and a blast to play around with. Over here we have a really good moneymaker. While the Rock has recently a bit overtaken it, of course all of those things are to be balanced, so expect things to change as needed. The Prospector is just a really good buy. If you want to go and make credits in the game, a Prospector is one of the better ways to do it. You do want to upgrade the Mining Laserhead, which will run you about 100,000 credits, which is a little bit much. However, after 2 runs you should have made that with the default laser anyway, and you can go ahead and make the big bucks. The upside of mining right now, of course, is there's no upfront investment, so if you get 30k or you get blown up, you don't lose any investment as you would do with cargo transportation, and really there's not a whole big difference between how much credits you can make, exception of course if you're going to be flying around in caterpillars or carracks, hauling the most expensive cargo, but then you take in massive risks because you're flying around with like 1 million credits in your hold, which could vanish at any moment. Again, be it do a 30k or because you get blown up. So your Prospector is a really good recommendation, and I would always recommend people to acquire one if they are looking for a credit maker currently, or they're looking to be interested in the mining profession down the line. It's always going to be a good ship to have. Let's go and take a look what they have parked downstairs, if any, and of course the holo displays, because MISC has quite a collection of ships that are yet to be released. It would not seem they have anything parked here, as both as these are just seating areas like we have seen before with Aegis. Right, holo displays. Number 1, we have the whole series. The whole series, of course, is the cargo holding job series of the MISC, and they are the most common cargo holders in the verse, and they range from the hull A to the hull E. The hull E being a limited sail variant, but it's a absolutely gargantuan freight hauler. Important to realize that I believe up to the hull C they can land planet side, but the hull D and E cannot land planet side, so they are restricted to flying between space stations. Another downside you have to keep in mind with those really large haulers is you need credits to fill them up, or you need to of course get the jobs that require a capacity like these ships would have. Will we see those jobs? Most likely. Will those pay as much as that you would make your own investment in haul stuff? Very much unlikely. That said, if you're running an industrial organization or you want to focus an organization on freight transport, or even like a military organization that needs to move stuff around, it's hard to get around the whole series because they just do that job so well, and they are lore-wise also incredibly common for that reason. Then over here we have again another hole, it would seem, so they are missing out on showing us some of the other things. So I think that they don't have any Model 4 at all, would appear to be the Endeavour. The Endeavour, of course, for those of you that don't know it, is the science ship, and it's a modular ship, so it can deploy a reasonably wide range of different modules to complete different tasks. So you have telescopes, science lab, research labs, medical bays, biodomes, etc., etc. It could be a really interesting ship, but it's one of those ships that's been around for quite some time, and we just don't know a whole lot about it yet. And for that reason, it can be a little bit hard to recommend, because outside of needing to buy the ship, you need to buy the modules. You don't really know which modules you want. And I believe right now there's only one package that has like everything in it, which is Chairman's Club exclusive only, and that's like $900 or $1,000. So that's a really high investment for a ship that we just don't know the use factor for as right now. And considering I don't think it's not being worked on, it has not been touched in quite some time, there's not going to be a rush really that you need to buy that. As for ships that are of course available, we have the good old Freelancer series. The Freelancer series also has its lovers and its distractors from it. Some people love it, some people complain about the cockpit view, and that's like you don't see all that much. I argue it's not really a combat ship, it's a hauler, so how much view do you really need? But we'll have to see, maybe some changes will be made, it's not really certain. It comes in a couple of variants. We have over there on the left side the base version. It's followed by what appears to be the Endurance, so that's the exploration version. That carries additional fuel tanks, sensor systems and stuff like that. It has the advantage that the Freelancer can go through small jump points, where of course some of the larger ships like a Carrack and also the Constellation cannot fit through those smaller jump points. So that has the edge for the Freelancer there when it comes to exploration. Of course, we just don't know how that gameplay is really going to work out. The Freelancer Max is the fat boy of the series. It is literally and figuratively just fatter, and as a result it can carry a lot more cargo. A really good starting cargo hauler ship. It will do you really, really well. And finally we have the MISC, which is the big missile based version of the Freelancer. And this thing's going to be the military version. So this has like special missile silos in the back instead of cargo, and it can just be spewing out missiles for a long and extended period of time. This could of course be really useful, but potentially also a really expensive means of doing combat. However, it does allow you to get with a relatively small number of ships to get a lot of firepower down range. In the end, there is only so much that countermeasures can do. If you get a dozen missiles at different intervals fired after you, one or two is gonna hit you at some point, which is literally like overwhelming the enemy defenses in that state. So if you don't have you're trying to, for example, do some escorting jobs, so you want to protect your cargo holders or maybe your miners, and you don't have the money for maybe on ships like the Hammerhead, which of course a lot more expensive, having a MISC or two around could also be a very good deterrent, just because of the amount of damage that they could potentially dish out. The downside, of course, is if you dish that damage out, it will cost you more because missiles will need to be paid for. Right now, missiles restocking in the PU is really cheap, but I do suspect that will change in due course because, well, them being this cheap doesn't make all that much sense to me. Especially when you look at like the purchase price, when you buy, say, for example, a size 9 torpedo, they're like 1,000 credits, which I think is still hilariously cheap. But outside of that, just costing 1,000 credits, when you go for a restock on a pad, you suddenly only pay 100 credits, which again seems even more ridiculously cheap. So yeah, I don't suspect those prices are gonna stay like that cheap, so missile gameplay could become a lot more expensive, but we'll have to see. This is just speculation on my part. So let's go ahead and move over to the last hull, where I suspect we will see the Reliant series to be displayed. And let's hope our character will not die from a heart attack in the meanwhile. It would seem that MISC has decided to go for the widespread layout instead of grabbing the hulls, but I think they wanted the larger ones to use. There we go, the Reliant cores and other versions of them. These ships are tricky, in my opinion. They're harder to recommend. They're like designed to be these two-person ships, but overall they just appear to be fairly lacking from what I understand from the people that actually use them. I apologize for the phone noise there. But yeah, they're just a bit lacking. I think that's a bit sad. I do think they need a little bit of TLC. And for me personally, what I just don't like is the whole design of them. I'm not a fan of vertical spaceships, unless they are vertical for a proper reason, like you would see, for example, in a more hardcore science fiction like The Expanse, where ships are stacked vertically because they use their thrust to generate the feeling of gravity. Which of course is not the case here in Star Citizen, so these things just fling around because. That said, they can pack a decent amount of firepower depending on the version, but of course you also have a fairly large target profile with a ship like this, so that has its own disadvantage. And finally you would note, like this will fling out, it's no longer really symmetrical as well, which is even worse in my opinion. So yeah, that makes the whole MISC lineup that is currently shown here. Take a quick look, see if they missed any others. It doesn't seem to be. For MISC in general, like the easy recommendations are of course the Freelancer and the Prospector. Always going to be useful, solid ships. Other good ones, the whole series, if you want to go into cargo hauling, they're going to be a advantageable ship to have around. If you like to go into racing, the MISC Racer is of course a solid option, and currently it's a choice really between the Racer, the M50 from Origin, and of course you have some of the slightly other tiers, like you got of course the 350R, you got some of the Mustang variations. These are still available, but when it comes to the hardcore stuff, the Racer is really one of the top dogs to pick in that regard. And of course, even if they are maybe more or less, all these stats are to change, but the core design philosophy behind these ships will remain the same. The Starfarer I also expect to be a decent money earner in the game. That said, we just want to see how that rework goes, because right now it's not a ship that I would recommend anybody to buy, because it is, there's no gameplay for it, so you can use it as a cargo hauler, but it's really, really bulky for being a cargo hauler, and it flies like a brick. And the interior is just absolutely horrendous to get around in. You will quickly get quite annoyed with it. Like if you get annoyed, for example, in a Caterpillar to get from the cockpit to get to the outside, you're gonna absolutely hate the Starfarer. So yeah, that's it for MISC for today. I hope once again it has been useful for some of you, having a few thoughts on a couple of these ships. And I will see you tomorrow, and I thank you for watching for today.